you said earlier that you were the only one that really remembered it. But then could you talk a little bit, if you can, about as an 8-year-old, maybe some of the experiences that you took away from your dad's drinking? And I know there was a lot going on during that period. I mean, it was a difficult period for the family and the journey to the United States. But could you share how that impacted you maybe then, and maybe some of the impact that you carry with you today from that?
As an 8-year-old, one of the things, as I mentioned before, is just taking care of my dad, making sure that my mom is safe. And so, like many people, you take on these parentified roles. So, and when we say that in the therapy community about being parentified, it means that you take on the role that should be for the parent, where you're caring for the child, but the child is caring for you. Now, there's nothing wrong when a kiddo says, I love you, mom, let me make you breakfast. But when it's, I'm not going to ask mom, I'm just going to make food because she fell asleep on the couch again with a bottle. Or I'm going to go ahead and clean up the vomit around because that's how I can be helpful. These are the kind of things that kids go through, and they take on this role way too young. So they may go on a path, and this isn't the same for everyone, but this is stories that I have heard in therapy and sessions with clients too, where they say, that's where I found my value, is in helping others, but I couldn't really connect with what I needed. The hardest question to answer was, well, what do you need? What do you want today? Something that no one's ever asked. So my 8-year-old self just learned to pick up that this is how you find value in the world, is by making sure that you are of service, that you help others. And that's something that people respond very well to, but then it comes at a cost, because you never really know when to say, today I need to cry, because you've never been allowed that emotion. So you smile through things and people assume you're okay. And I think that's the same for many families that I've worked with too. In the Spanish culture, many people are aware of machismo. This is like that term of, we explain it as the cowboy on a horse, that I'm in charge of everything, I will take care of everything, I'll be the protector, machismo. But one concept that family value that isn't talked about a lot is Marianism. And not a lot of people hear about that, but this is almost the female counterpart of it. It's you are the mother of Christ. So your job is to make sure that you care for the children. Your needs are last. There's a saying that I heard early on, which was a mother's plate is always cold because she's the last one to eat. She serves everyone else. And so for caregivers and relatives, that's one of the biggest issues, is to recognize that your needs are important too. But that's not necessarily built in when you are always caring for that other person. And that could be really dangerous.
Okay, so before we move on from childhood, and you and your daughter have a saying at the beginning of every day. What is that?
Yeah. So anytime we end a phone call, at the end of the night, or when she goes off to school and I drop her off, we say 3 things. I say, calm heart, clear mind, good actions. And that's my own quirky father/therapist way of saying, keep this in mind. And I know that as she grows up, we'll talk more deeply about this and she'll see all the messages. But essentially, the calm heart comes from when we're not regulated, emotionally regulated, when we feel anger, sadness. These are all normal emotions. So anyone that tells you you're not supposed to have those emotions, I would disagree with that. I think they're good emotions. They tell you that an injustice is happening. You should be angry about this. They tell you that something isn't right with what's happening, and you feel that sadness. But the thing is that if it overwhelms your system to the point that now I cannot control and I have to act out on this anger, or I shut down because of the depression or sadness, that's when we talk about regulating that emotion. So the calm heart is the reminder that we're not going to make decisions clearly until we feel that we're calm. Once you're calm, then comes the clear mind. And the clear mind can be anything from, let's think about this scenario. Are there other options? And so, my kiddo will bring up lots of things like, I'm really upset because this didn't happen. And it's like, okay, well, what else could it have been? Or what else can we do in this situation? Help problem solve. And so we start thinking about strategies. And I do this in sessions too with clients and families. It's really good. So it's also challenging thoughts or assumptions. It's my loved one is drinking because they don't value me. They don't care enough about their kids. If they did, they would quit. And so one of the challenges is the addiction. That's a really strong pattern. And when we understand that cognitively, then we make different actions. And that's the last part, is the good actions. So it's the I need support, or I need to establish a boundary. But we can't do that if emotionally we're in survival mode, which means we can't think clearly of what options we have or who to talk to. And sometimes the best thing is, I need to wait a day. And probably the best advice I was given in life, it's like, yeah, if you ever get that moment where it's just, you need to say something, maybe you need to sleep on it, and then wait. You might feel different about it. So your emotions are more regulated. But yeah, that's the calm heart, clear mind, good actions. And she adds a little dance to it. So she makes it better than I do. But,
yeah. Maybe we'll see the dance sometime. You can replay that. So before we get to some of the topics that I know you had on your list, and I want to come back to burnout in a minute. We heard last week about the ACEs score, and I thought that was really interesting, and you mentioned it already. But it's an important topic because if you go through this experience as a child or as a young adult, or you potentially carry that on with you through life, and it can lead to further problems, right? And what have you done as a father to preempt that in your own family? I know we talked a little bit about your daughter, and every time I've been around you and your daughter, I can see the bond between the two of you. And have you used your personal experience to shape maybe the guides that you put around your daughter, or the way you interact with your daughter, so that this doesn't become a repeat problem in your own family?
So I'm so glad you asked that, because my default setting is people pleasing. So if I see you smiling, then I'm doing something right. If I see you frowning or not smiling, then I've done something wrong. Or I need to do something better. I need to work harder. I need to put this need aside. I need to be here. And so with my daughter, it's too easy for me to be like, yes to everything, And so I have to go against that nature of wanting to people please, because I'm creating a very different dynamic. If I go down that route, then I'm doing the opposite, whereas I may have had a very authoritative or aggressive parent that was no to everything and yelling, and so fear controlled things. I may go the opposite direction, and out of love, um, develop a codependent relationship where I want to make sure that you're okay, and I will pay for this, I will take care of this. And sometimes that personal responsibility that I need to work with, that's the other side of the coin. And every parent is different, and that why therapy is amazing, because you see the things that you can't see with your own eyes. Being part of a good community is also another thing, because you will hear people that are the opposite. You'll meet people that will say, oh, I need to learn to be more loving. And then the other parent will say, oh, I need to learn to be more stern or more firm or hold on to this boundary. And so for me and our family, it's a thing like, sweetheart, today it just didn't work out that way. And yeah, bedtime is still going to be at 9 o'clock. And I love you. And yes, you have every excuse in the book why we should keep talking. Oh, wow. These videos are time capsules. So I know in 10 years, she's going to come back to this and be like, oh, really? But I remember when she was like about 3 years old, and she said, Dad, can I have 4 cookies? I thought that was so specific. I said, no, you can't have 4 cookies. She goes, no, you're right. You're right. How about just 2? And I'm thinking, who is this kid? She's learned to negotiate. She's so smart, at this. So every child and parent dynamic is different. And maybe what one parent needs in terms of establishing boundaries, another parent may say, I need to soften up and I need to practice the listening skills. So it's a different skill set. Yeah.
Good. So the program was built around delivering community education and support. And we talk a lot about how we plan to do that in the future and the importance of those three components, are critical, I think, to family healing. And I think that, we didn't talk much about your experience growing up in that family and maybe the shame or discomfort that you had in sharing what was going on at home potentially. But as a practitioner, before we talk about burnout and the other topics, can you talk a little bit about the importance of community and healing for families that are going through a situation like this? That just the importance thing is, Lynn Sherman early on talked about just finding your tribe, and maybe spend a few minutes on that.
Yeah, and it's something that I think has echoed with just about every speaker. When you think that you're the only person that's going through this, you don't give yourself space to hear how else you could handle it, because you are stuck in this shame cycle, and because you're stuck in that cycle, you don't break through. You can't think outside the box. You remain inside that box. And so, one of the things that I think is incredibly important is to find as many people as you can to connect with. There is a stigma that still exists about talking about mental health issues or talking about substance abuse, talking about what failure may look like. And that's in all sorts of capacities. And yet, when you reach out to people, you'll find people who say, I went through that journey, or this is what helped me. And maybe what helped that person may not be exactly what helps you, but it puts you on a path where you start hearing different ideas. And that's what's important. For me, it was is making sure that I found other families to kind of bounce things off of. And it's like any good parent that says, I need a break, and they go to a park and the kids are running free on the playground while the parents are sitting there going, this was a week and this is what happened. You know, there's something important about that. You're building a community. For me, I found those communities in different spaces, at work, at school, my faith. These were spaces where I could talk candidly and openly and not feel like I was being judged. It's a big part of what appealed to me, this program. The quick story of how I found out about this program: I was teaching a class and asked the students to find a job description somewhere online and then bring that back in here so we can break through what it was asking. And of course, the job description that one of the groups brought back was this job. And I had not heard about it. And it was a collaboration between the university and a church and providing a space and taking care of caregivers. And I'm thinking, why haven't I heard about this? I mean, this is amazing, because I had worked developing programs like Celebrate Recovery back in the past, and my work, I worked in a rehabilitation center, I worked detox, done all this stuff, and I never thought that I'd finally get to this space where I'm getting to do the things that I love, and communities are receptive, because faith-based organizations, churches, these are spaces where people come and they're hurting. And sometimes they come and they sit down and they never share what's going on. And I always grew up, I heard this phrase when I was a kid and I loved it, is that a church, a faith-based space, it shouldn't be a hotel for saints, but a hospital for the sick. And so I looked for those spaces where people were actively doing the work to help heal and build communities. So I find out about this and I go, yeah, I want to know more. What's going on? And I remember walking away from the interview and saying, listen, let me be very clear. Even if it doesn't go my way, please, let's stay in touch, because I want to know more about this and help any way I can. And that's the same thing I hear from so many people that are involved in this, because it's a unique space. There's not many places that specifically look to caregivers and family members. And I apologize, I'm a social worker, which means I like to socialize. You ask me a question, I'm going to go off, and yeah, it drives students nuts, because they are looking at the clock and saying, yeah, when's the bell going to ring? It's like, but there's no bells in college, so ha ha ha. No, sorry.
So, okay, community, we've got it. It's really important and it's needed, right? So, education, talk about burnout. I mean, if you had to say the 2 or 3 action items for a family managing a crisis in a family, give us two or three things that you would say, here's the things that I would focus on to avoid burnout in your situation.
Yeah, I would say that, and it's like anything, right? If you're in the middle of a crisis, or what is it, the old phrase, when you're in a hole, stop digging. So, the best advice is stop for a second and let's figure out, okay, what's happening here. And sometimes when you stop and you take that pause and you have that moment of assessment, you realize, okay, there's some work that I need to do. Different therapists have different philosophies, but there's a very popular movement around systems, meaning that there is a balance to everything. We get into a groove for things, and that applies to also families that are dealing with substance abuse. So the groove is everyone caters to this person that's dealing with this addiction, and we have to help, or we have to avoid, or everyone plays their role. But this is how we survive. And the second someone heals, all of a sudden there's this shift, and we don't know what to do. So now we're no longer taking care of them. Now we start facing all the emotions that were underneath, that were masked by the alcohol or the drugs. Because now that this person's sober, let's talk about some of the bitterness or anger or resentments that may be there. And that's part of the work that needs to happen. So when we talk about education and working with families, it's about recognizing, number one, you need to pause with what's going on. Number two, you need to seek help. And I know this has been mentioned before, a good therapist will be very helpful in that space. A good community with individuals who have walked this, many voices. I'm a big fan of the phrase that says that wisdom is found in the multitude. And that's important to me because you need to hear different voices. Some of them you'll agree with, some of them you'll disagree, but you should agree with. And some of them, it's just the timing. Take that message, hold on to it, and it will be applicable down the line. So you need to have that space. You need to be able to allow yourself to hear that message.
Great. Now, so we talked about burnout. Mm-hmm. You mentioned hope.
Yes.
And then finding the tools.
So hope is really hard to see when you're in the middle of a crisis. And that's why I keep coming back to community. You need to find people that have had different experiences to tell you it will be okay on the other end, but it will be painful as you go through it. And not just tell you that, but say, I will be there for you. So if you need to take a call at 2 a.m., that someone is there to give you that clarity of mind. I got to tell you, I've gone through crises in my life where I have been blessed to have wonderful people that say, 7 a.m., I will be there. Let's have a cup of coffee. Let's talk about this. Let me walk through clearly. This is what you're thinking. This is the emotion. This is where you need that support. And it's been the most amazing thing in my personal experience. As a therapist, here's a space where it's hard for us to deal with that because our schedules are set up a certain way. And unless you're an emergency hotline, we can't take that call at 2 a.m, but we have that appointment there. However, any good therapist will tell you if an emergency happens between now and our next appointment, here's the number you need to call. But they'll also tell you that you need to build relationships because you also need a community that's available on the time in between our appointments. I love the work of a therapist called Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was a person-centered, a relational type of approach to therapy, whereas before we talked about, well, this is in your past or this is a relationship issue, but he was more of like, let's work here in this space. There is this kindness that we can build, this concept that they called unconditional positive regard. That when people come into a space and they feel broken, that it is a safe space and that we can tell people, you are welcomed here. There is no shame. And that's very different from the days where you would walk into a space and say, well, this is what you did wrong. Okay, this is what you should be doing differently. Life is tough, but you have that space where you're welcomed. And the reason why I bring up Carl Rogers is because he said that we therapists do for people what others get from their friends and their families. And that blew my mind. Because that means the person who's scheduling to be on my calendar, this is a sacred moment because they have nowhere safe, confidential, and trustworthy to go to. So the idea of a program like this, where What would happen if you could build a community that felt safe, that could be trustworthy, that a community can share that language, and that that language can then be not only instilled into the individual seeking help, but then also to their children, to their community? You're changing everything. And yes, I know what I'm saying here. You wouldn't need the professional here. We may not be there yet as a society, but I think we can work towards that, where at a certain point, you wouldn't need someone like me. And my hope is that as this program continues to evolve, that we train the people that are coming from within and saying, you need to be the one here. You need to be one facilitating the groups, because that's where the real magic is going to happen.
So you see why he's an easy interview. I want to talk about a couple of things, because I know you want to talk a little bit about ITC. And, I'd ask you a question about tools. I think the air traffic controller example is great. But, for families that are facing burnout, and the outcome is not crashing an airplane, it's crashing the family or crashing yourself or crashing a marriage or, other types of collateral problems. Talk about the tools, like ITC, and, we can spend a few minutes on other things that we have as a vision. Maybe talk a little bit about ITC and the small groups and your vision for that and how you see it helping, because these are evidence-based programs that we want to bring to the community and bring people in to actually do real work with them by licensed professionals.
So I've been a clinician. I've worked in the space for over 20 years, a licensed clinician for about 15 years. I gravitate more towards kind of therapy that's cognitive behavioral therapy, the idea that if you change the way you think about certain things, it'll change the way you feel about things, and then your actions will change. So the calm heart, clear mind, that's where that comes from. So I also believe in so many other therapies, but ITC is something new that came up, and it's invitation to change. And it's based on, and they label it as the science of kindness. That if you teach people to be compassionate for themselves, that they will be able to hear the different tools that they can do to help their family members, to help themselves. Because
that's compassionate for themselves, an important word, right?
Yes, that's compassion for themselves. Because there's no question you're going to sacrifice everything for your loved one. But where do you make the sacrifice to say, I need this time, I need to heal, I need this support, I need to give myself grace and forgive myself? Because there are mothers or fathers or siblings who kick themselves and say, I should have done this sooner, I should have said this. This is where I failed. And I will tell you as a therapist, when you hear that message, that's because when things are so traumatic and out of control, we try to find some way to make sense of things that just don't make sense to us. And the only thing we have to grab onto may be just, I could have done something differently. And there is some things that we can change and we can do differently, but when the blame is completely on yourself, then that becomes a problem, because that's when you're struggling and you're getting into that burnout. So ITC is a message of hope. It's an invitation to change. It means that we're going to set aside for a second your family member, and we're going to say, what can you do that will then change the system, change the family? And sometimes that's understanding, like just knowledge, understanding the science of addiction, that this is not you that caused this. This is not you that's changing this. This is a addictive pattern that's hijacked the brain. They love you. They love their children. But biologically, their brain is functioning on pleasure right now and is just connected to this, and they feel that they will literally die without this drug. And once people understand that, they realize, okay, then I'm not the failure, then I don't have to change things to try to fix this. I just need to heal and maintain that boundary. So part of it is knowledge, part of it is awareness of what we're feeling, because just like many first responders, and we're talking about the firemen, we're talking about police officers, teachers, who are the front lines of things that are happening, you become numb. And being numb means this is how you survive. I have to shut off that alarm that says, I am hurt, I am sad, because right now I need to focus on the crisis and surviving or helping. And so when you numb out, and some people do it artificially by using drugs or alcohol, some people numb out emotionally. So part of what the ITC model says is we're going to stop, and in a small group, we're going to actually point out all these things. And you're going to start to see it in yourself in a way that you may have never had the chance to safely talk about that. And when you hear that parent across from you say, this is my story, and you connect with that too, you start developing the language around awareness of your feelings, how to change those, what tools to implement. That's where transformational change happens.
So what do you say to the person that says, I'm angry? Is that acceptable?
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier. I want to hear about it.
So I'd say, yeah, for some people, saying I'm angry is probably the thing that they need to say, and it's the hardest thing for them to say. So I often tell parents when they say, fix my kid because my kid says no to me all the time. So, okay, well, here's the thing. You don't tell your kid, don't say no. You teach them when no is appropriate. Because saying no to an adult may save their life one day. And yet we fall under this thought pattern that, no, you have to obey because I said so. And so I think when it comes to anger, it's no different. You help individuals to express that anger. I'm upset. And some people have an easy time expressing that anger. Okay, so for you, it's expressing it in a more healthy way. And there's all sorts of rage rooms, which I think that's interesting. That's a new thing. If you want to go out and break something, guess what? You can pay your ticket, go in a room, and there's plenty of old dishwashers, lots of wonderful printers. I'm not going to say which brand, but that you can go out there and get some of that out there. And then for other people, it's just voicing that you're upset. I knew an individual that came in the session that the challenge was to scream, to say out loud the things that frustrate you, to go out there to a mountaintop. And their response was, I think I can go there, but I would have to whisper it. I don't know how to say that. And that's going to be the hardest struggle. And so these are the kind of things that when you're in group, you start to recognize, I'd like to be more like this, or I need to learn to be more like that. Yeah, I think it's okay to be angry.
So the last thing, and we're going to open it up to questions. We're running long on time, or short on time, actually. But you shared a story between you and your daughter. And I know a big part of this program is about caring for the rest of the family. And we've talked a little bit about your experience with her. And you shared a story about her asking a question of you about what you appreciated about yourself.
Yeah, we were just having a conversation, and I thought to ask this question of her. I said, what are two things that you appreciate about me? I was just curious, what am I doing right that may stand out for her? And she says, no, you go first. Because again, my daughter's real sharp, right? So she's on target. I said, okay, well, I think that you are very funny. You're also very insightful. You understand situations very clearly and quickly. And so I admire that about you. And then and I thought she would take some time, and she goes, well, one of the things that I like about you is that you're very good about finding a solution to any problem. And I said, okay, well, can you give me an example of that? And she says, well, we were driving once, and I remember the tire blew out, and you stayed calm, and you said, are you okay? And then we pulled over somewhere, and you found a shady spot, called someone, and then we got the tire taken care of. And I didn't realize that had stuck with her. And I wasn't planning that to be a life lesson. And it reminded me that the best thing that you can do when you're in any of these situations is to be the best version of yourself and to do whatever you can to improve yourself. Therapy, groups, community, reading a book, self-help, getting more sleep, the things that Nico talked from Alpha 180 the other day about having a self-care plan for your body, your mind, your spirit, your soul, those kind of things. Being the best version of yourself means that the people around you observe that. And they learn, that's what I need to do. That's what you do when the tire blows out or when someone gets angry at you. Now, I will say that my struggle is when someone gets angry, I tend to be calm. But it's probably okay for my daughter to hear me say, hey, buddy, line drawn, back up, kind of thing. And for her to see that because she needs to understand, yeah, there are times where you need to speak up now. How you modulate that is important. But I think that was a great experience. And again, my kiddo is always teaching me things. So, and I'm very grateful. And anyone who knows me and knows our relationship knows how much I value that. I've said this before to you, Russ, that I've nearly drowned 3 times. A lake, reservoir, these different places where it's like, this is legitimate, this is the day you go, and I survived those. I've survived 2 major car accidents and all the dangers that happen from migrating from another country to the US. I didn't really understand fear until the moment my daughter was born. Because when I was there and we were waiting for that first breath, and I tell everyone, it's like this magical moment where everything in the room was silent. Like, it's just a different state of awareness. I was just focused on hearing that first cry, and then she cries. And then I felt fear. I felt fear of dying too soon. I felt fear of not being around long enough. I felt fear of not being in those moments where I can't keep her safe. And that's a fear that I have to navigate, because I need my daughter to know to learn how to speak up for herself, to learn how to protect herself, to learn how to make good decisions. And I share all that I have shared today because I think it's important that that we have these honest conversations, that none of us are perfect and we're all learning. And I am certainly one of those, and I will be continuing to learn. And so there's no expert really other than the continued experience that you're building. But yeah, I love my kiddo, and making sure that the next generation has a different way of handling life and better opportunities is what really draws me to this program about breaking those chains.
That's super important. So what we'll do now, and thank you for sharing all of that story. It's a remarkable story, and I'd like to open it up for any questions we have. And I think we'll have a mic going around. If anybody has any questions for Rene, we'd like to ask him specific questions. And we have questions?
We had one submitted already.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question is, when taking perspective into account, are there areas where it's more necessary than other, like open communication versus boundaries?
Yeah, so if I understand that correctly, like, open communication versus boundaries, the idea that maybe you have to decide whether you're going to continue talking to a person or you have to cut off that communication for safety. And that's really a tough one. And that's one that I think when you work in community and you take care of yourself, you know that you're not making that decision out of exhaustion, because you can be very tired and say, okay, you know what? We're just shutting this conversation. I'm done. And that may not be the appropriate response. Or you feel like, okay, I guess I will have that conversation. Yes, I'll give in to this. And again, it's the exhaustion. So it's reading where you are in that space, how you're feeling. That's the calm heart part. So if you are regulated, then you'll be able to look at what's the pros and cons to any of this. Both of those are good strategies. But like anyone who knows me, right, the key phrase that I'll always say, it depends. So that's the thing you need to consider. Where are you in that space?
But from your perspective, I think as an 8-year-old, you don't really have, much opportunity to exercise that. But for the people that come here that are, working with a situation currently as adults or as young adults, what advice would you give them? Because a lot of your theme is about self-care, and you talk about burnout, and you talk about taking care of yourself. And you actually shared a story about how at one point on your journey, your siblings had to pick up for you a bit because you had pushed yourself to a limit, right?
Yeah, when I was taking care of my dad, all the things that we had to go through, and those were weeks at a time, and it was an uncertain time. We didn't know if he was going to survive or not. Was this going to be the ICU admission that would, end things? And if I wasn't clear, the miracle happened on February 14th last year, not this year, but the year before, where we got the call and said, we have a liver, and it's a matching donor. And so if you can bring him in, we'll do the transplant. And so I was there with him for the recovery, but I realized soon after that, I was stretched thin and I needed more support. And because of my function as a social worker, I felt like I could help in this space. And because I was the oldest, and because this was my job, I filled out paperwork all the time. I could help in this space. But once my siblings had the opportunity to go in there, I realized, guess what? It's okay. You know, I've got a sister who can handle the 22 medications that he had to take at his very specific time. You know, that could be done. I had another sibling who was like, I can travel. I can go to San Antonio. I can do the 2-hour drive and take dad there. And so I suddenly began to see that I had to release a lot of this. I had to let go. And I wasn't holding on, or at least what I think, I wasn't holding on out of pride, but it was well, if I make a mistake, this could be a colossal failure. But I had to trust that there were other people who could help and other people willing to step in and be part of that community.
Got it. Have any other questions? Well, oh, we got one.
So for kids who grow up in a home with an addicted parent that are sort of parentified and have that role, are there any tools or is there specific advice you give them for not becoming enablers later in their life?
You're talking to every therapist, right? So, you know, one of the things that we try to tell them or challenge them is, what do you enjoy doing? What do you do for fun? And I'll tell you that 9 out of 10 times they will struggle because no one's ever asked them that question. It's like, what's your favorite food? And we have to almost go back to childhood. These things that we learned in your teen years when you start to build your own individual self and you start to break off from parents. And, you know, parents have short hair, the kids have long hair. Parents have long hair, the kids have short hair. I always joke about this in my classroom. My students, they're so punctual. They show up, they turn all their assignments. They, you know, will send me a long email message explaining why they were late for 5 minutes. And I'm like, it's okay. And I often tell them in the classroom, especially when every one of them is in their seat and they're in class, like 5 minutes before class starts. And I go, this is your generation's way of rebelling, isn't it? It's like you show up on time, early, and turn in everything. I'm impressed. So what I tell them is, you know, what do you do that is just unique for you? And if you can't answer that question, then your journey of exploring starts now. Because when you do that, you'll start to say, oh, I like something that no one else likes. And you're having that exercise for the very first time of becoming your own person. And when you do that, then you can say, I don't have to be here for all these things. There are other people who can do that. I can take care of me and balance those things out. And then also find someone who you can walk through life with. That can be a group, that could be people who share similarities, but someone who you can be open and honest. And again, that could be therapy, that could be good relationships, but someone who can see when you're starting to dip into that space of, oh, I'm putting myself aside. And that, again, is going to put me at risk of being burnt out. Yeah. I hope that helps.
So you touched a little bit on Marianismo and machismo, which I appreciate. I am wondering if you can dive a little bit deeper into how that connects with the invitation to change concept of behaviors make sense, especially thinking through some of those roles of either being the father in the family and having to, you know, keep it together, or the mother and how that role plays in. But that can even shift to the eldest, you know, sibling, or just someone that becomes the caretaker, the main, keeping everyone together, rounding up the group. What does that connect to in behaviors make sense?
So as part of the invitation to change curriculum, you know, you'll learn different skills. And one of those skills is behavior makes sense, which is the understanding portion. There's awareness, there's understanding. And when we talk about behaviors make sense, we're talking about recognizing that the behavior that a family member is exhibiting, that makes sense to them. I'm frustrated. I had a bad day at work. I feel uncomfortable, so I'm justified in having a 12-pack right now. I'm really angry, so I'm gonna get behind the wheel and I'm just gonna drive off to a bar. We had a disagreement. But wait a minute, you're on probation. You're gonna lose everything. Or you're gonna lose custody of your child. That doesn't make sense. Behaviors may make sense to that individual in that moment. There's a lot of healing that needs to go when the person can identify their emotions and say, oh, this is my go-to because I'm trying to stuff that feeling. And addictions come in all sorts of flavors. So we may be talking about alcohol today. We could be talking about so many other things, because an addiction can be anything that someone does compulsively and feels like they can't control it. And that's the key behind behaviors make sense, because to them, in that lack of control, it just made sense to just do this. So when it comes to the caregiver or other people having these roles, or even culturally, machismo or marianismo, some people may go in there and say, well, you need to just completely, change the way you act in this family dynamic that is so unhealthy. And I tend to be very cautious, because this, as unhealthy as it is, needs time to unravel so people can see what's the alternative. It's just like drug use. You pull that drug and that substance away, there's a hole left there. That was covering up something. And unless you figure out what that something is, it's going to be, as I've heard in a lot of recovery circles, whack-a-mole. Something else is going to pop up. So behavior makes sense is recognizing that for the moment, that was your go-to, and that makes sense, or that was the role you needed to fulfill in that family, and that makes sense. Once you've identified it, are there other alternatives? What else could be healthier? What else could be more helpful? I did mention I'm a social worker, right? So I like to socialize. This is like the funnest thing, is just talking, having conversations. So,
Any other questions?
Unfortunately, I don't think I can unpack the entirety of this conversation in just a few minutes, but and so we expect an email or something later on to say I was thinking about it. Love the stories. Love the fact that you're willing to share the stories. My question is so at 8 years old, you're trying to figure out where to get milk and Cheerios and all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, you're just trying to support. At what age did your dad, you never spoke about your mother's drinking. Did she stop drinking as well?
well, my mother's journey was different. So she never drank. And part of the reason is why I don't mention too much of my mom is I think most people can imagine, when you're in that relationship and one partner is drinking and not making the best decision, the other partner tends to suffer as a victim. And so her journey was different. My mother, she continues to this day working in the dry cleaning business. And that's what she's known for the last 30, 40 years. And she is amazing at what she does, and she is great at that. And she found different spaces where she could grow as an individual. She learned how to read as an adult. And she learned by helping us with our homework and trying to practice things. So she was learning with us as we were growing. And so my mother, I guess to answer the question about, what this journey was like for her and how this evolved for her, she found her community. She found her voice, and she found a space where she could lead. And that was a powerful thing for a young woman who didn't have anyone in this country, didn't have any connections to family, had been separated, to finally have power. There are a lot of people that struggle with addiction and mask the feeling of being powerless. And so it can be interpreted as alcoholism or drug addiction, but when you get down to it, it's because it's the only thing they can control. So helping them find a space where they can have that space, that leadership capacity, and I'm sorry, I keep dialing it back to this what we're building here, but the idea that we're gonna get to a point where you have individuals that are peer support specialists, one-to-one. It's maybe the first time someone's ever said, let me hand you the microphone and you lead. And for my mom, she found those moments and those spaces. And she's an amazing woman, and she's doing well because of it.
I'll just go back quickly to and how old were you when your dad stopped drinking?
So my dad drank probably since the time that I was 2 until I was 8 years old.
Okay, and so this is going to be my question, so we can and so the question I have for you, so between 8 years old, whenever your dad stopped drinking, did you have a job anymore as an 8-year-old? And if you didn't, what did you do that kind of manifested itself into your, and I agree with the question earlier about the enablement component, right? And you talked about your siblings, right? And so you were enabling, so individuals like yourself, unintentionally, you're enabling your siblings to not do anything because you're doing everything. At what point did you finally realize they're really good at this stuff and I don't have to do it and it's okay for me to let it go? You look like you're 16, so I'm not going to try and guess how long you've been doing this enabling, but it was longer than it should have been, I imagine. And at what point did you just say, this is, and you talk about, I just realized that, but how do you do that, right? So after all of these years, it ultimately ended up in one moment? Is that?
So I'm 42 years old. I'm not afraid to put that out there. So 42, and today my dad had cataract surgery. So he's is now part of the whole work of feeling better, getting better, taking care of himself. And so my sibling, my sister, one of my sisters drove him to the appointment. Another sister brought him home. My other sibling sent the picture around to everyone. So to answer your question, I think I was today years old when I learned to let go. I'm still learning because there are spaces where I feel like, let me help here. I can do this. And I have to be okay saying, no, they've got it. And if they need help, they will. And it's funny, I'll get a call from my sister at 6:30 in the morning. Hey, this medication, is dad allergic to it? Yes. They came up in the hospital, tell them yes. And it's burning if they ever do IV on it, so avoid it. And that's all I needed to be. So I could still take my daughter to school this morning. And so it's a balancing act, but it's hard when you feel like if you don't do something, things are going to fall apart.
So I'm feeling a part 2 of Rene, session 2 maybe. And Rene, thanks for coming tonight and sharing your story. You do such an amazing job of interviewing others and drawing the important points out of them. And I think, we heard from Dr. Clemens a couple of weeks ago about, this is a disease that doesn't like to be talked about. And I think the importance of what we're doing here is getting the conversation started to help people heal, and maybe we'll all help each other as well with our own lived experience. But with that, we're at the top of the hour, maybe a couple of minutes past, and I don't want to take away from you how you close every session. So I wanted you to take the time to give us a proper closing tonight.
Thank you. I think I know exactly what you made. So this is something that we have built into this group experience. And for everyone who's been here, thank you for coming here. If you're new here, and this is your first time, whether you're online or you're here in person, one important thing that we want to share with you: welcome home. We'll see you next Monday. No, not next Monday, because next Monday is Memorial Day. So in 2 weeks, we'll be here. C.L. Turner, you'll be able to read his bio online. It will be a really good interview. If you like music, show up early. You're gonna hear some interesting stuff. So please be here and share that space with us. And if you feel someone could benefit from this, just know that these videos will be posted online. Share it with others. If those of us who are online here or even watching us at a later point, if something really connected with you, please feel free to reach out, explore the resources that we have on the website, and know that we're trying to build something that really connects with a community that may not have had that support. And so anyone that you think of, invite them. Let them know about what's happening here. We'd love to connect. So thanks for joining us.